Hello there internet people, and welcome again to another Maverick Taylor gaming video. Now today I want to run through what I believe from my experience and from what the gaming community on the whole believes is the top 10 best campaigns ever in gaming. Now a campaign is slightly different from a simple story, so I'm going to lay down my ground rules for what I am considering a campaign, which is that there is no RPGs, so anything such as Final Fantasy or anything of that nature is out, and no big open world games, which admittedly these days are mostly RPGs, so no sort of Red Dead Redemption, anything like that. It's just going to be campaigns. So those are my rules. No RPGs, no big open world games. But from there though, considering those rules, we'll jump into it, shall we? Okay, and at number 10 we have Portal. Now, I'm considering here Portal 1, but you can throw in Portal 2, I guess, as well. Portal 1's quite a short game, so we'll go with that. But just the Portal games. Now, these games were fantastic. Pure puzzle games, there was no enemies, except for the little funny turrets. But the storytelling was genius, frankly. You had this semi-helpful, sarcastic robot that over time was just getting gradually more sadistic, or certainly at least more sarcastic and suspicious in what her intentions were and why you were actually in this place. It became fairly ominous as the game went on. But the story, of course, is quite elaborate in that sense. It starts off you're just doing some puzzle games with some portals, but it brings you into the world. Why are you here? What is this place? Who is this voice? What's going on? What is the true intentions and agenda here? And although this game was only a few hours long, the original anyway, it made waves in the gaming community. I mean, even today, these two games together are considered like the pinnacle of storytelling in a puzzle game. They're funny, they're really clever writing. And, you know, some say this game was too short, but honestly, I think the original one, at least, was the perfect size for what it was trying to achieve. And again, it had a number of clever references, very funny writing, so I think it, you know, deserves a spot on this list here at number 10. But let's move on then to number 9. And at number 9 then, we have Modern Warfare 2. And to be fair to the original Modern Warfare, it redefined the modern FPS game. We went from the World War II obsessed era of older Call of Duties and Medal of Honor and whatnot, Battlefield even, to the modern day. And suddenly all FPS games were modern day shooters. Now, honestly, I think this was a good thing. The World War II setting I found anyway was getting a little bit tiresome. But that was the first game. Let's move on to Modern Warfare 2, because that's what really nailed it. And it absolutely nailed it. I remember when this game came out, I was so excited, and I couldn't believe it. When you find, spoiler warning by the way, but when you find Captain Price in the Gulag, and then the various other things that happen, I think everyone in the world still hates General Shepard. The way that it displays this story, I mean, No Russian was infamous for a reason as well. But, you know, this game had it all. Great writing, great dialogue, very good voice acting as well, and the twists. They had quite a few twists, and they were brilliant, but just then the setting that it was embedded in as well. All of the various things that you could do. It had the sniper mission again, but then there was the snowmobiles, and the setting. And whilst this entire video is about stories, the setting in this game reinforced the story. It really made you feel like you were in some sort of James Bondy action film. It was incredible, and I think it deserves a well-respected spot here at number 9. At number 8, we have Doom Eternal. Now, I sort of went over in my mind whether I wanted Doom Eternal or the 2016 Doom. And I settled on Doom Eternal because the original 2016 Doom was fantastic. It rebooted one of the most iconic FPS games in history. The most iconic, frankly. And then, in my mind, it's just, for the concept of this video anyway, better. It's got far more focus on story. There is infinite action. I mean, it just doesn't stop. It's a very, very intense game. Personally, I prefer the art style of this one, that it was more colourful, more dramatic. So I'm a bit more in favour of stuff like that. Almost a sort of half Borderlands aesthetic. Go that far with the loot dropping out and whatnot. But yeah, I preferred this version of it, if I'm honest with you. And that is because of the art style. I feel it feeds into the setting of the game and just generally makes the story a little bit more intense and a little bit more interesting than the first Doom. So that's why I've placed it here at number 8. At number 7, we have Tomb Raider. I was going to say the original Tomb Raider then, but I actually mean the 2013 Tomb Raider reboot game is what I'm going to be talking about here. Now, for me, this game was actually a bit of a shock. I was surprised at just how good this game really was. After there had been, honestly, a number of abysmal Tomb Raider games. For younger fans of the series, they don't realise what happened after Tomb Raider 3, really. And this was just a great reboot, an origin story for Lara, which showed her changing from a very incorrigible adventurer, but incredibly naive, never actually been on an actual excavation or anything such as that yet. And this shows how she became Lara Croft the Tomb Raider. And tomb raiding actually takes a bit of a backseat in this game, and that's what I like about it and why it's on this list, because it's much more linear, less focus on exploration, and a much bigger focus on the story of how Lara became who she was, and the ever-changing nature of her personality. Such as, most of the game she's running away from the bad guys, and about halfway through the game, it changes, and suddenly she's going on the aggressive side, she's actually chasing them down. Now, for me, that was a brilliant way to show that her character was becoming a lot stronger and more confident in herself. And you see her evolve throughout the game, and that's why it's here at number 7. I think it's a genuinely good story, but it's fairly basic. There aren't really any twists involved. It's not particularly complicated, but it is just very well written. The voice acting is brilliant, and the setting in general again really feeds into the narrative and makes you feel quite claustrophobic at times, so they've taken that aspect of it to help feed the narrative, and I think that was brilliant. So here it is at number 7, and from there though we will move on. At number 6 I have placed Halo Combat Evolved, the first one. Now, my reasoning behind this, before anyone comes at me in the comments, is I agree with you, this is an incredible game. It redefined FPS for an entire generation and was honestly just almost perfect. But in terms of story, in terms of narrative, it isn't quite as good as some of the others on this list, which is why it's at number 6. But let's go in why it is at number 6. It's fantastic, isn't it? It set up an entire universe of very, very interesting plot lines that could be expanded on, dropping you right into the middle of a war. You play as Master Chief. You drop right into the middle of a war against the Covenant. And those sci-fi elements really are the masterpiece of all of this in my mind. There weren't that many sci-fi FPS shooter games before this, but after this, oh, you can see the influence, particularly in Bungie's later work with Destiny. You can absolutely see. I mean, let's be honest, Destiny Titans are basically just Master Chief, aren't they? And it's very easy to see where this game went right and how it did this. It treated the narrative as the important part. The shooting aliens and gameplay was secondary to the narrative, and I think that's what actually makes a really good game in general if you're talking story anyway. There's plenty of games out there that are the other way around, and they're great games as well, but if you're after story, it is fantastic when developers do that, and it's very clear to me that Bungie did that here. But from there, though, we shall move on to the next item on the list. And at number 5, we're into the top 5 now, guys. What will it be? Bioshock. Now, this game, oh, this hit out of nowhere, didn't it? No one was expecting this to be as good as it was. It was thought-provoking, it was clever, it was witty. There was an amazing twist that I think we all know what that is. I'll give another spoiler warning, but we all know what the twist was in this game, and it became a meme for virtually everyone, even non-gamers. Even my wife, who doesn't play video games, has heard of this. And I think that was what really sold it. I think personally that's what really sold it, was that it was known outside the gaming community. That's how hard-hitting it was. And you're plucked in this incredible setting of Rapture, which is dark and grimy and dingy, and there's clearly been a war that's gone on. It's underwater, which makes it a sort of a fantastical place anyway. And this blends horror, sci-fi, and bits of and obviously the FPS genre together so magically to make a game that was near perfect in its ability to tell a story. And it was a very engaging story as well, and as I say, quite thought-provoking about sort of in regards to the ways of economics, capitalism versus communism versus sort of the Andrew Ryan philosophy of the game. And I just think that's why it deserves this spot at number 5. So with that said, would you kindly follow me onto number 4? And here we have Gears of War 2. Now again, I went for the Gears of War 2, same as Doom actually, because Gears of War the original was fantastic, but it was a little bit light on the story. It set up the world brilliantly, but then 2 ran with it. And it was, honestly, I found this game genuinely quite terrifying at times. Terrifying and disturbing. The section where you're facing experimental things, that was incredibly... I really did not like that when I was younger. And then what happens to one of the characters' wives as well, that was incredibly disturbing. And just very, very well written. It was an incredibly interesting world, and that's why I'm putting this slightly higher than the others, because I find the game world, the setting, more interesting. However, I will admit, the story in and of itself, whilst extremely well written, was reasonably basic, and the last act as well, where you had to just go blow everything up with a big bomb, felt a bit abrupt, and like it wasn't necessarily the original ending. Also, the voice acting did fall a bit flat sometimes, but that just goes to show how amazing the world was that I've put this, with all of those issues, higher than some of the other games on this list. That's how I feel about it, at least, anyway. And I also think this game was just really good at playing with how you felt about the different aspects of the game as well, such as what your characters were actually doing. It did call into question sometimes the ethical mindset of what your characters were doing and what your overseers were trying to accomplish as well, and sort of whether what you were doing was right. And I quite like that. But that's it for this one though, so we'll move on to the next one in the list. And at number 3, we, rather controversially potentially, have HalfLife, of all things. Now, I know there's some people going to come at me on this that say this has the best campaign in the world, but personally, I disagree. I love this game. I think it's brilliant. I never played it initially when it came out because it actually came out in 1998. Now, I'm amazed that it came out so long ago. I did not think it was that long ago at all. So I didn't play it when it originally came out, but I have since, and it is a fantastic game. It's Valve's ability to... less is more with this, I think, and they told a story with your mute Gordon Freeman that everyone remembers. Now, I don't think it's unreasonable to say that this game changed gaming. This was one of the first games, or the first game, I think, potentially, that made people sit up and go, wow, you can actually tell a really good story with a video game. They're not just sort of these silly little Sonic the Hedgehog things for kids anymore. And that they were actually an art form. And you could tell a really compelling, really, really interesting story. And I think it deserves to be in the top 3 simply on that alone. But then the fact that its story, even now, 20 years later, 23 actually, it still holds up, particularly when you start adding in Half-Life 2 and whatnot. And I think it really does deserve to be celebrated for that fact. I always felt that the game felt enormous in scale, massive in scale, yet still very human as well. Still very grounded because of your character. And the fact that he doesn't say anything is even more impressive how they were able to get away with this. So that's why I'm putting this here, bang in at number 3. Okay, and at number 2, taking home the silver, is Uncharted 2. Now, along with a number of other games on this list, I've put Uncharted 2 because it took what the first one did and mastered it. And I believe, personally, out of all of the Uncharted games, this is the best one. This is the one that really makes you feel like you're playing an Indiana Jones movie. You know, you feel like you're in an Indiana Jones action-style movie. It is incredible what they managed to achieve. It is a massive improvement on the first game. It's fantastic writing, incredibly witty dialogue with very clever characters. And much like, again, another few games on this list, the scenery where you are really feeds into the narrative. It really makes you feel like this world is in danger. It is enormous and you need to fight for it. And it just, the way they make the environment around you, again, feed into I mean, they did this in the first game, actually, where suddenly it turned into a weird survival horror game, and all of a sudden it was dark, it was cramped, it was claustrophobic, and it's brilliant when people do that. They think about the narrative in terms of more than just what the characters are saying and doing, but about how visually and mechanically, what you can do with the game mechanics, that you can make it into a more interesting story. So that's why this is here at number 2. I genuinely do believe it is the second best. And I would just like to say a hearty thank you to Naughty Dog, because at number 1, we have Vanilla Destiny, the first one. Ah, that was such a... I'm only joking. It's The Last of Us. Of course it was going to be The Last of Us. It was always going to be The Last of Us. This game, I think, much like HalfLife before it, made people really, really sit up and listen to what gamers have been saying all along, but that video games were an art form that sort of should be looked at with the same amount of artistic integrity as movies and TV shows and music. You can tell a story, you can manipulate emotions, you can care for these characters. I think because you spend so long looking after Ellie in this game, you genuinely do care about her, as Joel does, and you feel that emotion coming along. And I think that's why it's such a hard-hitting game, with what it does at the end as well, with a brilliant ending that just leaves you sitting there spaced out thinking, who was in the right on this one? Which does, in fairness, thematically link with the entire world of The Last of Us, where everything is a moral grey area. No one's really entirely sure what's right or wrong anymore in this world. And that then leads as well into the characters. The characters were incredibly three-dimensional, very well written, the dialogue was brilliant. That level of connection that builds up between Joel and Ellie very slowly as the game goes it's one of the best things I've ever seen in any media, let alone video games, and I very much believe it deserves to take the number 1 spot today, because it is fantastic. It is perfect in terms of telling a story. So that's it, guys. That is my top 10 non-RPG, non-open world campaigns in video games. And some of those, like The Last of Us, has a surprisingly good multiplayer as well, so you can legitimately call them a campaign before anyone comes at me about that. So that's it from me today, though, guys. Thank you for watching if you've got this far. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed the video, please do give it a like. It really does help. And if you really enjoyed it, give me a subscribe. I'm a new channel. I really don't have that many subscribers. And I'm enjoying what I'm doing, so I'd like to go further with this. But thank you very much if you got this far, and you keep safe.